For over 2 decades, Tim Gard has been connecting with audiences from Texas to Tasmania, cracking them up with his entertaining, instructive presentations. In fact, Tim has spoken at more than 3,000 events around the globe. Recognized as a pioneer in humor-based training, Tim is the founder of Comic Visions. He's also an author and frequently invited guest on TV, webcasts, and podcasts. He's a member of the Speaker Hall of Fame, an elite honor held by fewer than 150 speakers worldwide. Get ready to let go and have fun. Oh, and Tim promises, and I'm not sure if this is good or not, but he promises there will be no group hugs. Please welcome Tim Gard.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, and especially Tom. It's been a long time since I've gotten a chance to spend any time with you, buddy. So glad to be here with everybody. And you know, one of the things I really like about your group, you're looking at humor, about the uses of humor, and I thought I'd spend a little bit of time and look at, you know, I call it finding the funny, about what we do as we build stories. And I think that a lot of people got into the business, and as we look at humor, a lot of folks were focused in just as a way to tell jokes. And what I found in our corporate market, in the market that I've been in for almost 25 years now, jokes are actually a fairly bad way to use humor. A lot of times the jokes, in fact, put somebody down. They almost diminish someone, and you can almost always substitute a different either a group of people or color hair or whatever for the punchline just by switching it around. So what I like to concentrate on is I'm a humorist. I'm not a comedian. I think comedians are divisive. I think that they often almost put people down too much. It's all at the expense of entertainment. Whereas with the humorist, we want to only use humor to enhance and never diminish anybody. That we use humor to also help people understand a concept, or to be able to really work through a problem. And so, you know, my main focus here today is kind of looking at different ways that you can use humor, but especially I think more in storytelling. And the number one way I believe that stories are told, I mean, in Toastmasters on the main floor, it involves a story, and there's some rules that I can run through here, I think, with you. Let's see if this will allow me to do this. I just added this in here, and let's see if it'll even, I don't know if it's going to allow me to do it, though. Unfortunately, it's not letting me change it here. Hang on just a moment. We have a new I've got a new format that automatically switches this stuff, but it looks like it's not working. So we may have to just do this, go back to the old version of manual. So give me just a moment here. So the first thing I tell you, if we're going to look at using humor, it's that we don't tell and retell stories. What I want you to do is to live and live them. If you tell the story, you're looking at it as really kind of an abstract. You're looking at it as something where as you're telling a story, you're not in the moment, you're not present, you're not totally here. And I'm really sorry, for some reason, this is very strange. It's not letting me do anything with the slides here. I was hoping to be able to do this today, but I guess we're not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to go right back to this right here. And in fact, I'm just going to go back to, there we go, TimCam, and we'll do this. So let me start over here, and you don't have to start the time. We don't tell and retell stories, we live and relive them. And when you do that, it doesn't matter how many times you've told the story, you are always going to be what I call present, that you're in the now. And this is so incredibly important when we're storytelling, that we're not relaying just the facts. Is we want to be able to captivate people and take them on a journey of the mind. And a story, there's no length to a story or a funny story. A story is as long or as short as it should be, but the longer a story is, the more payoffs it has to have along the way, with a big payoff at the end. So, you know, you can have a story. I have a story that I tell. It's the big sweaty guy in the middle seat story. It's been a perennial, it's been one of my #1 requested story for 20 years. It's 11 minutes long. And normally a story wouldn't be that long. But the way that story is constructed is literally it has a series of payoffs along the way with a really big payoff at the end. And you know, if you want to have, I can actually take questions as we go. I will, of course, have time at the end for them. But with this format that I'm using here, I'm not really able to see the chat room, unfortunately. So we'll have to kind of have to see if we can make this work as it is. So the main point about all this is when we tell a story, it's not a documentary. You know, a lot of people will have something funny happen to them, and then they'll retell the story. And they're not realizing that we don't want to do documentaries. We don't want to know word for word about what happened. What we want to do is we want a feature film instead of a documentary. And a great example of this, I was in Australia. My friend Yossi Ginsberg had a movie made about him that was called Jungle. If you get a chance to it, outstanding movie. And when I arrived in Melbourne, Yossi found out I was there and he invited us to go to the premiere of the movie. And so we went and I got to talk to him. And while we were visiting with him about Daniel Radcliffe, by the way, played him in the movie. And while we were there, I was talking to Yossi and I asked him, I said, what was really the hardest part about this movie? And he said, interestingly enough, he said, he kept trying to tell him exactly what had happened. And they kept trying to explain to him that they're not looking at the documentary. They're doing a feature film or an entertainment film about his life, and that they can stretch the truth a little bit and they can either tone it down or build it up. So in our storytelling, especially our funny stories, it's a feature film and not a documentary. The stories you tell have to evoke a strong emotion. And usually this can be from pain. It could be humor that may come from pain, but doesn't cause pain. But there's got to be some sort of an emotion in there. It's incredibly important that you have that. This is one of my props that I've invented over the years. This is called a cubicle crab. And what it does is people can take this, you can go across the top of the cubicle and just go across, you go, are we being a little crabby today? One of the reasons why it's been such a hit in my seminars is that people have this strong emotional context of working with people that are crabby. When you combine the humor with it, then it helps give people what's called, in the brain, we have mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are things that connect a thought, something memory that we have stored with a visual concept. You can smell cookies and be in your mother's kitchen from years ago. You can hear a song and be in a prom. Again, it takes you right back. These sort of things help people with these strong emotions to attach something funny to it instead of the negative that the crabby person would often provoke as a thought leader. And the thing has to have global understanding of a relatable premise. You know, I was really surprised. I spoke in Dublin not long ago, and I talk about about the cubicle crabs, and I just found out there they don't have cubicles in Ireland, that they actually have offices or open seating areas, but they stayed away from cubicles. The joke didn't work there. And I always thought that a cubicle was a cubicle no matter where it is. And yet I found out that wasn't the fact. So we always really want to look at if there's global understanding of the joke. And slang is so much slang it's out there that we have to stay away from slang or from humor that relies on a play on words. Because often with people that are speaking English, or if jokes are being translated, they just either won't translate or they won't understand the slang. And, you know, it's funny. I get asked a lot. People ask why jokes don't work really well, or stories, when you translate them. And if you look at the main way that a joke is told, you have a joke has a setup, punchline, and the last word is the punch word. So let's see. I wrote a joke years ago. I read that if you write your negative thoughts down and throw them away, you'll be able to have less stress. Well, I've got less stress, but I really miss my iPad. Now, in that joke, then I say it was a good joke. It's a joke. You have your setup, your punchline. iPad is the last word. That's the punch word. If you translate that to French or German or some other language, what happens is we change the syntax or the setup on the line. And so the joke often won't work just simply because we've translated it and changed how the words are moved around. With stories, we have a lot less possibility of something like that happening. What really happens with the story is that we're not looking at a very short item. Let's see. A joke is simple in its elegance. We don't look to make them longer. In fact, you want to make jokes shorter if you're going to use them. A story is as long or as short as it should be, though. And this theater of the mind is so important about building an idea when you're using storytelling and humor that the number one rule of humor for me is if it doesn't add to, it distracts from. So when you're building your story, we want to add to make it something that is interesting and that people are involved with, but not too much that they're over involved or that it's too long. You have this theater of the mind, but you also have the ability to expand on these ideas a little bit, but you don't want to make it too much. I mean, if you are talking about something you had a recent accomplishment, and then you add in there that you also just cured cancer, probably not going to be believable. And that's where we start losing our audiences when we say or do things that just don't make sense. So this using humor as much as we can, we want to be able to choose our words very carefully. Mark Twain said, the difference between a right word and an almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. Each of the words that we choose is critical in how our story unfolds and how our audiences becomes involved with it. In the Big Sweaty Guy story, I talk about pouring pond scum in my mouth. And when it came out later on, I used to say that it popped out of my mouth. And the right word was erupted. It erupted out of my mouth. That's just exactly the right word. And that's onomatopoeia, when the word sounds as the action it implies. So the use of our words, we really want to plan out our words as we do these stories. And I think that when you look at props, I'm known for using props. I know Tom's seen me several times with props. The cubicle crab. One of the things that I've used a lot, this is one of my business cards. It's on the front of it. It says, this is a major credit card. It's got my phone number there on the front of it. And the person will say, do you have some other form of ID? And if you turn it over on the back, it says, here is some other form of identification. And then my website is down here. It's the exact same size as a credit card. When I check in a hotel, I use this when I check in a hotel. Props are probably the best explanation of that premise that I just gave you. If it doesn't add to, it distracts from. Too many props, it's not going to be something people are going to take seriously. But we can do so many things with visuals when you're telling stories or when you're speaking, or USB port. Everybody's got USB everybody's got the little standard drive. I have them like in a pig shape, or this is actually a USB drive too. It's a chicken foot. And I think it's really important that you explain to people why you're using them, or people will think you're wool gathering, and nobody wants that. That's for sure. So do we have any, I can pause for a minute here. Do we have any questions so far? Tom, is there anybody in there? And I am able to look here a little bit.
Yeah, I'm watching. There's nothing popping up yet. People are just going amazement like normal.
I see Eve's hand up. I don't know if she means to have her hand up.
That was so she could be at the front of the line for timing. So
okay.
Yeah, so Tim, we talk about props.
I have a question.
All right, go right ahead.
Yeah, this is Rajiv. You're seeing my avatar. That's just so that I can be a little bit off screen while still being on screen. Anyway, but my question is, I love what you said about if it doesn't add to it, it distracts. I guess my question to you is, what is the gauge of if it's actually adding to it? So like, what is the gauge? Because that's a very fine line, right? Because sometimes, as let's say experts, if you're doing like a thought leadership type, presentation, or you're doing if you're a subject matter expert, you're so close to the facts that you're thinking that everything adds to it. But then again, as an outsider may think that it's too overwhelming. So I guess my question is, what is that gauge or the barometer that you
Sure.
use that makes it easier for us to know if we're truly adding or distracting?
They're distracting. So for me, it's really, I keep it really simple. If the words are better used rather than the visual, then for me, that's usually that's the line there. Now, if I were to tell you that I have a USB drive that's shaped like a chicken foot, that's not going to work unless I show it to you. That's really hard to visualize without doing that. And so for me, it's that if I have to spend a lot of time explaining a concept, whereas I can just hold something up and show it to them like this, then that's where I'll use the visual. Years ago, I had a speech coach come to our chapter in Colorado, and he had me do a piece there. And when I got done, he told me, he said, Tim, if you ever want to be a successful keynoter, you need to dump the props and dump the jokes. And he said, if the words are strong enough in theater, the people on stage don't even need to have clothing on. And I said to him, first of all, about people naked on stage, ew. But I said, for me, in the play Hamlet, when he's got the skull in his hand and he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well, Horatio. Do you think it works better with the skull or without the skull? And he said, you don't need the skull. I said, no. Which one works better? And I think that's really, for each person, it's going to be a judgment call. But the secondary limiter that I give to you is that we don't want to be perceived as a comedian. You know, there you go. Exactly, Tom. You don't want to be perceived as a comedian. You know, Gallagher and some of these folks have all these wild props like that. Years ago, again, one of my favorite speakers, really good friend of mine, got asked, are you a comedian or are you a speaker? And he said, let me be more succinct. Are you a comedian that wants to get more money by speaking and having some content? Or are you a speaker that tries to reinforce your message with humor? And of course, he was the latter. So it is subjective. It is a judgment call. But I think, especially when people aren't expecting somebody to use visuals in a program like that, I think they'd be the most effective. So again, the words can be used, fine. But when a visual helps reinforce that image, when in doubt, I'd say leave it out. That'd be my best advice for you. Okay. Anybody else have one? I'm always happy to answer questions. How are we doing on time? I'm unfortunately not able to see that. So
we're at 17 minutes.
I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
They say less is more. What are your thoughts on that?
So less is more is only going to be effective if you know, in a shorter program, in my shorter programs, I'm finding that on stage I'm probably getting hired more and more for not an hour, but actually 30-minute, or even I'm doing 20 minutes for $1 Million Roundtable coming up here. That I have to be strategic about how I use humor and when I use it. And in the effect, you know, I think that as far as humor is concerned, I would say that it's not as apropos, that saying isn't as apropos to humor as it would be to, say, shock value or something like that. I've never had a client ever say to me, Tim, there was too much humor in there. And I've never had somebody come up to me and say, Tim, can you make it boring? So I give my customers a dial and I say, you can tell me the percentage of humor to content that you want. Turn that dial 80-20, whatever it is, and they'll meet that. I don't try to just kind of guess what they're looking for.
Tim, I'm going to support you with that from a dear friend of ours, Patricia Fripp. And she refers to it, there are no boring speeches, there are boring presenters. So if you're adding the humor, you're getting rid of that boring. Now, here's a friend of ours from California, all the way over in the San Francisco Bay Area. Tyree Johnson's got his hand up, Tim.
Okay.
Tyree.
Hey, Tim, good stuff. We share something very similar with this club here at Laugh Lovers in San Francisco. But my question to you is something you had mentioned that like being storytellers, you should be able to build humor into it and then have a big payoff. Should the big payoff have a moral to the story, or just the big payoff is a big laugh?
I would say it's usually a big laugh, but if it's an incredibly important moral, that can fit. It's got to be something totally surprising though. I was in a cab where the guys had his mom yelling at him the whole cab ride all the way to the airport. And when we finally stopped, the cab guy, the driver turned around, he looked at me and he said, "Tim, my mom wants me to have a lot more of these cabs." And he says, he picks up a cup and he goes, "I can't envy the ocean for all the water my cup won't hold." And I thought, that's pretty profound.
Wow.
You know, that was incredibly profound. In that case, I would use that if it's a very unique or something that's very rarely heard, but almost always go for the laugh. Always go for the big laugh. And it should have a series of laughs along the way with a big laugh at the end. And I'll give you an example. So when I'm talking in the Big Sweaty Guy story, I sit in the middle seat. And when I do this, I look over and I say to the person left to me, I go, "Lucky thing I made this flight, huh? All this space would have been wasted." And I go, these seats get smaller every year, don't they? So what I'm trying to do is I want to be able to make it comedic, but I want him to see the picture of me being jammed in there, which is more important even than anything else. And so, you know, I guess what I'd say is with me, I'm always going to default to humor. I'm always going to try and include a laugh here and there, but I don't want to make it too much. I'm really not a comedian, and I don't think, you know, I don't think you folks want to be that either. So anybody else? Because I think that, you know, that it's always important how our minds work around this material. But here's what I want you to get out of all this. When we use humor, I want you to think of this. Alan Wise says, "A speaker's primary responsibility is to those that hire them, second to the audience, and third to yourself." If you look at your program, your story, your joke, all of those things with that idea in mind, you cannot go wrong. And if you err on the behalf of the audience instead of yourself, I think that you're always going to be in the right too.
Mhm.
I don't think that anybody would go wrong by assuming that we want to do what's best for the person that hires us or a customer. We want to be able to share laughter, but we have to be within our time frames. We have to fit the needs that we're being asked to fill.
Yeah.
So,
Tim, we have one more. Our dear friend Ray Moore, another fellow former from Denver, Colorado, former government employee though, so a little connected. Ray, you're muted.
All right.
You're muted, Ray. His wife's been trying to mute him for years.
I know, and she's tried corks and everything. First of all, just a quick comment on Lesson Moore. Do you know there's a tombstone in Arizona, that reads, "Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a 44, no less, no more."
No more. Yeah, it's a good. It is a good.
Anyway, just to share that with you. But I'm wondering, what's your experience with promoting your presentations as Tim Gard, the storyteller, compared to Tim Gard, the keynote speaker, or Tim Gard, the comic? Well, I think storytelling has a special place. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of the things that it's funny you should mention that it's something that I've played around with over the last few years. It's probably something that's going to be implemented on my website in the not too distant future. But it's funny when people are hiring, they're looking for they have a slot in their mind. It's a keynoter, a general session, a workshop. That's how they're looking for it. And so it would almost be keynote, comma, storyteller or something like that. And I'll give you one more for that because you either work for the government or still do. My company used to be called Comic Visions originally, and I changed it to Tim Gard International because I was having trouble. People are having trouble contracting with the comedian. They can book with Tim Gard International, but it was a hindrance to them to be able to book, or it looked like they were hiring a comedian. I could be as funny as I ever was, but it's a matter of just, you're right. The words are important. You know, we live by those words and we're hired by them. Somewhere storyteller needs to be closer. And it's something we're working on changing on my website right now. It's good.
Yeah,
Great
I
point.
agree.
Thank you for that.
I agree. It's an important concept as a speaker to keep in mind. Thank you.
I agree. Anybody else? How much time do I have left there, Tom?
Oh, you have 3 or 4 minutes for a good wrap up.
Let me wrap this up. I've been doing this now for over 25 years, and I've discovered that if you use humor for yourself, first of all, then you can diffuse a lot of the stresses that are out there and it'll make you a better presenter. Every time when I go on stage, everybody almost I know has a ritual they go through when they go on stage. Scott McCain says showtime. I go in the bathroom and I stand in front of the mirror and I tell myself, this is going to be the best one yet. And I do it until I'm convinced that that's what my state of mind is when I walk out of that room, that this is going to be my best event ever, my best story, my best joke, whatever it is. And so I think when we use this humor, just don't forget to use it for yourself. If I'm tired, I had spent 2 days trying to get home, Tom, from Wichita, and was so burned out. And I watched Tim Conway and his sketch about the Siamese elephants. And I just sat in the airport and laughed and laughed. It was what I needed to see and hear myself at that moment. So just remember to treat yourself to some good humor too. And I'm always available, Tom. You're a dear friend of mine. All you have to do is ask if you want me to come back. I think what you're going for with your club is very valuable. And thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Now, some of these people didn't watch the video, but Tim for years has been branded with the rubber chicken, hanging out of his luggage, getting through airports. There you go in the background. Boom. One of the first people I ever met that also carried rubber chickens and bought rubber chickens like myself.
Always did.
Yeah.
And you know, the ones that make sounds are funny for about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
They're not funny anymore. So
I don't know, Tim, I ever got to tell you about everybody before pandemic happened. I was doing a lot my Red Cross group, and I did a session. I taught it even here with our Find Your Funny of teaching CPR with a rubber chicken. And boy,
that's
it
really
worked out
funny.
well. We just built
That's
upon why did the rubber chicken cross the road? It doesn't matter. He got ran over. We got to help him out. But
I was just in Africa training. I got hired to be in Johannesburg, and we were in the Jeep and we were heading out to one of the tours that we were going to be making. And about this time, about maybe 12, 13 chickens went across the road. And the driver, no kidding, the driver goes, why did they choose to do that? Just before, and I was too good of a setup. But Sophia looked at me and I said, that's low hanging fruit. I'm going to let that one go.
Yep.
So listen, I'm not going to be able to stick around the whole meeting here though. I'm so glad to be invited. And I'm only been able to be home today and I leave again tomorrow again. But I'm glad to have this time with you. My address is just tim@timgard.com. Always happy to answer questions. And I wish you all the best. And Tom, I'm sorry I can't stick around longer. But
no worries. I'm so honored that you did take this time for us. We appreciate it. And I will reach back out for you and I to do some more things. There's big things coming in the future. So thank you. Please give Tim Gard a huge round.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thank you, Tim. All right.